In Vietnam, hidden among dense jungles and muddy rice fields, one of the bloodiest conflicts of the 20th century took place. The Vietnam War, 1955-1975. It wasn't just a war of armies, but a war of psychology, fear, and surprise. The Viet Cong, officially the National Liberation Front of South Vietnam, didn't have modern tanks or bombers like the Americans. But they had something else, ingenuity and the jungle on their side. From these conditions came the legendary and terrifying Viet Cong traps. An ordinary path could hide a deadly mechanism. A single step into the grass could be a soldier's last. From simple yet effective sharpened bamboo stakes to more sophisticated contraptions capable of disabling entire squads, these weapons were every soldier's nightmare. Viet Cong traps weren't only tools of killing. They were psychological weapons as well. American soldiers feared every step they took. The war turned into an endless game of cat and mouse, where every mistake could mean death. Deep in the Vietnamese jungle, where every tree could hide an enemy, lurked one of the Viet Cong's most cunning inventions, the bamboo whip trap. At first glance, it was nothing more than a simple piece of bamboo, but in the hands of guerrilla fighters, it became a deadly weapon. The trap worked like a spring. A bent and tightly drawn bamboo pole was hidden among the bushes or trees, ready to strike the moment its release mechanism was triggered. All it took was a soldier's step, pulling unknowingly on a concealed wire, and suddenly something lashed out from the foliage faster than a snake. Razor-sharp bamboo or metal spikes, fastened to the end, slammed into the victim from the side, the front, or sometimes even from below. The blow was so powerful it could pierce uniforms, skin, and muscle in an instant. It wasn't just a physical wound. It was a strike that tore into the mind. Soldiers who hadn't been hit themselves marched with growing terror, because they never knew from which direction the next attack might come. The bamboo whip rarely killed outright, but that wasn't its true purpose. More often it left a man severely injured, unable to continue. In an environment soaked with humidity, disease, and infection, such a wound could be nearly as fatal as death on the spot. Worse still, an entire squad had to slow down, halt, and care for their wounded comrade, leaving them exposed and vulnerable. The bamboo whip was more than just a trap. It was a weapon of fear. Every step into unknown terrain could be a soldier's last peaceful moment before this merciless, silent enemy struck without warning. In an open field or on a narrow jungle path, a single wrong step could turn silence into an explosion of terror. The bounding mine, also known as the jumping mine, was a trap that changed the rules of combat. Instead of staying buried in the ground and striking only at the feet, it would spring upward, leaping into the air, and detonate at chest height, right where a soldier was most vulnerable. Its purpose wasn't just to wound, it was to create chaos. Before the soldier's eyes, ordinary terrain became a death trap. The ground that looked harmless suddenly spat out force, and in an instant the air filled with noise, dust, and deadly fragments. The bounding mine struck shoulders, torsos, places where even military gear offered little protection. The damage was not only physical, it tore into the psychology of the unit. Panic set in, formations broke apart, and trust in the very earth beneath their boots was shattered. The psychological power of this weapon was merciless. A soldier who once walked across a field without fear now second-guessed every step. Movement slowed, confidence vanished, and doubt replaced it. What if beneath my next stride lies something that could end me in a heartbeat? The bounding mine didn't just injure bodies. It disrupted rhythm, shattered morale, and turned routine patrols into anxious, halting marches. Imagine a war that sends you into a place you would never willingly go. In front of you is a narrow hole in the ground, barely the width of your shoulders. Every instinct tells you not to enter, but the order is clear. You are a tunnel rat, a soldier chosen for a job that terrified even the toughest men. The Americans learned that bombs, gasoline, and gas weren't enough. The Viet Cong had built their underground kingdom so cleverly that the only way to defeat it was to go straight inside. And so they sent men, often smaller in size, armed only with a flashlight, a pistol, and a knife. The tunnel was an entirely different world. The air was damp, the walls soaked with clay, and the smell of earth clung to your skin. Every movement forward was slow and silent because you never knew what lay around the next bend. It could be a pit of sharpened bamboo stakes, a hidden mine, or a Viet Cong fighter waiting to fire at point-blank range. A tunnel rat needed nerves of steel. In those conditions, all the modern advantages were stripped away. No tanks, no aircraft, just darkness, fear, and the echo of your own breathing. Every click of a trigger could mean the end. For those who survived, these missions became nightmares that returned in their sleep. But without them, the Americans would never have understood how vast and intricate the Viet Cong tunnel systems really were. These were the men who crawled into the very stomach of war, knowing they might never see daylight again. In the jungles of Vietnam, death didn't always come with the sound of gunfire. Sometimes it came with the faintest touch, the brush of a boot against a nearly invisible wire. Tripwire traps were among the simplest and most terrifying weapons used by the Viet Cong. The wire itself was nothing to fear, thin, hidden among leaves or stretched across a narrow path. But what it connected to was the real nightmare. One careless step could trigger a grenade swinging down from a tree, an explosive charge hidden in the mud, or even a bamboo whip armed with spikes. Soldiers marching through the jungle knew that any twig, any blade of grass might conceal a wire waiting to claim its victim. The genius of these traps was not just their lethality, but their psychology. Tripwires forced soldiers to slow down, to second-guess every step, to scan the ground with eyes wide and nerves on fire. Progress through the jungle became a crawl, and the fear of the unseen enemy was often worse than the enemy himself. A soldier pushes his way through the thick jungle. Sweat runs into his eyes, the air is heavy, and every step sounds too loud. The path looks clear, just leaves, mud, and fallen branches. But it's only an illusion. The Viet Cong knew that the greatest weapon was the loss of trust in the very ground beneath your feet. Explosive traps hid under a thin layer of soil, between tree roots, or directly on trails used by American troops. They weren't sophisticated factory-made mines. Often they were simple grenades, mortar shells, or pieces of unexploded ordnance that the Viet Cong had turned into deadly devices. One step was all it took. A snap, the metallic click of a trigger, and a split second later, the jungle's silence was torn apart by an explosion. What had been the sound of leaves and insects just moments earlier became chaos, smoke, and screams. The Vietnam War was not only about bullets and bombs. It was a war where even the air and a man's breath could turn into weapons. Both the Viet Cong and the Americans knew that in the tight spaces of the jungle and tunnels, gas could be as deadly as a machine gun. The Viet Cong used improvised gas traps inside their tunnels. A simple canister of tear gas or toxic fumes, hidden so that it would release when disturbed, was enough to turn a narrow corridor into a suffocating death trap. A soldier crawling underground had nowhere to run. The choking began instantly. Panic came faster than death. These traps weren't always meant to kill. Often their purpose was to slow the enemy down and break his courage. The Americans responded with their own methods. Helicopters and artillery scattered CS tear gas canisters across the jungle and into tunnel entrances. The gas spread slowly, seeping into trenches and underground passages, designed to flush the guerrillas out of their hidden world. But the Viet Cong were prepared. Ventilation shafts and simple filters of sand and charcoal reduced the effect. And when the gas drifted into civilian villages, it fueled anger rather than fear, deepening hatred toward the American presence. Gas became a double-edged weapon. The guerrillas used it as a hidden trap in the dark to sow fear and chaos. The Americans used it on a massive scale to drive the enemy to the surface. Yet the result was the same. The Vietnam War became a conflict where even the air itself could kill. In the deep shadows of the forest, the ground itself could become a silent judge. The punji pit, pits lined with sharpened bamboo stakes, looked at first like ordinary depressions.
Generate by AI.
Perhaps just animal holes. But beneath a thin layer of leaves or grass lay something else. A trap that waited patiently for a single misstep. A soldier marched carefully, eyes fixed ahead, as his patrol crossed what seemed like harmless terrain. The moment his foot sank into the pit, everything changed. The sharpened bamboo spikes hidden inside pierced through his boot and slid into flesh. It was an attack that required no gunfire, only a step, a moment of carelessness, an action that seemed meaningless until it wasn't. The punji pit didn't always kill instantly, but its true power lay elsewhere. A wound in the middle of the jungle slowed the entire unit. First aid, the threat of ambush from above, lost momentum. And in a war where every moment counted, the injury of one could throw an entire squad into paralysis. The soldiers moved across a narrow bridge stretching over a stream or swamp. The wood looked old, but sturdy. In the jungle, it was often impossible to tell what was natural and what the enemy had prepared. And that was the power of the trap known as the collapsing bridge. At first glance, it looked ordinary. Planks laid out, tied together, just a little fragile. But beneath the thin surface waited emptiness, filled with sharpened bamboo spikes or hidden explosives. When the first soldier stepped onto the trap, the bridge gave way under his weight, turning a path forward into a sudden deadly fall. This trap was terrifying because it exploited trust. A bridge was supposed to be the way across an obstacle, the means of survival, and in an instant, that trust was broken. What should have carried them forward instead became the very thing that ended their journey. In the jungle, where every step could be the last, there was a trap known as the Venus flytrap. It was a cruel twist on the bamboo spike pit, designed to strike in a way that felt almost alive. On the ground lay what seemed to be just another patch of leaves and mud. But beneath it was a hidden mechanism. The moment a soldier stepped onto it, the trap snapped shut. 2 or more panels lined with sharpened bamboo spikes clamped together like the jaws of the carnivorous plant that gave it its name. The strike was sudden, brutal, and unexpected. It wasn't just a fall into a pit. It was as if the earth itself had reached up and bitten down with sharpened teeth. The wounds weren't always immediately fatal, but they were often crippling, leaving the victim unable to move. And in the jungle, where there were no safe roads or quick rescues, such an injury was often a death sentence in disguise. In the jungles of Vietnam, nothing was ever what it seemed. Even symbols of pride and hope could be turned into deadly traps. The Viet Cong knew that American soldiers would never simply walk past an enemy flag. To an American, it wasn't just cloth. It was a trophy, a symbol of victory, a reminder of home. And that made the flag the perfect bait. Beneath the red fabric, explosives were often hidden, or a tripwire connected the flag to a grenade. The soldier who reached out to tear it down, eager to carry it as proof of his courage, instead became the victim of his own pride. One single pull, and the jungle's silence was shattered by an explosion. The Vietnamese jungle was deadly on its own, humid, suffocating, alive with insects and sounds that robbed soldiers of sleep. But the Viet Cong found a way to turn nature itself into a weapon. And so, venomous snakes entered the war. A snake hidden in tall grass or placed inside a bamboo basket wasn't there by chance. It was set deliberately. The guerrillas knew where soldiers would have to crawl, along narrow trails, into trenches, into tunnels. A simple trigger, a loosened lid, a tripwire, and out of the darkness came a living weapon. In many cases, the Viet Cong used so-called death boxes, small containers holding venomous snakes. When an American soldier opened a crate or brushed against a trap hidden in the tunnel wall, the snake lashed out. It was a weapon that couldn't be detected by metal sensors. No explosion to warn others, just nature turned against man. The Vietnam War was not only about tanks, aircraft, and battles between armies. It was a war where even the simplest step could turn into a fatal mistake. The Viet Cong managed to turn the jungle into their ally. Trees, water, soil, even animals were used against the enemy. For American soldiers, it meant they were fighting not only guerrillas, but also the very environment surrounding them. The traps waiting underfoot or in the darkness of tunnels were not just about blood and steel. Their real power was fear. Fear that the ground might give way, that a venomous snake could spring from a box, or that even a flag, the symbol of patriotism and courage, might be nothing more than bait for death. And here is a question for you watching this video. Imagine walking through that jungle yourself. Would you dare to take the next step, not knowing what lay beneath? Would you trust the bridge meant to carry you? Would you reach out to tear down an enemy flag, knowing it might be rigged to explode? Perhaps that is the greatest lesson of Vietnam, that war does not only kill bodies, but also courage, certainty, and trust. And sometimes, the deadliest enemy is the fear that follows every step you take.